A word to the wise. We are an explicit podcast tackling content with adult themes, as well as entering spoiler territory if you aren't caught up with us. In both episodes, we released 3 episodes, where I talked about what we were going to be reading for this week, and I messed it up every single time. We are reading through chapter 6 today, not chapter 7 or until chapter 8. I messed it up 3 times. So if you read the extra chapter, I'm sorry. We're going to talk about it next week. But yeah, that's it. I just wanted to apologize on the front side, but we're going to be talking through chapter 6 today. So cool. Hey there, this is Cross.
And I'm PJ.
And we are Words and Whiskey, a podcast for veteran and novice readers alike. We tackle fiction novels and love to talk about what we're drinking. You should think of us as your drunken weekly book club.
And that is exactly why you should forgive Crossland for not only fucking up the chapter number every single day or every single episode that we've released in the past week or two, but also doubling down on it, saying, all right, we're reading up until chapter 8 through chapter 7. Got that? Through 7 until 8. However you think about it. I'm pretty sure you said that a few times.
I fucking did. I know I did. I know I did inside of the Howler Pod episode. And what's really funny is that I know that I did all the editing for those episodes, and so I had to listen to myself so many times. I considered dubbing over it. I've never had to do that for the podcast, but I considered dubbing that out and dubbing over it.
Crossland called me to tell me that he screwed up this week while we were reading, and I was 2 pages away from beginning chapter 7. Mm-hmm. I don't think I told you I was that close, but I was just about done with chapter 6. So.
Oh man, that would have been an entire, well, it wouldn't have been that bad. We've done this plenty of other times where we've made mistakes on which chapter. It hasn't happened since the original Red Rising book. And you know what? That's a great callback because this is basically the start of a new series, right? Like this, we are truly kicking off the first episode covering actual Iron Gold today by Pierce Brown. So
I will say, I think it'd be a mistake to try to start this book without having read the first 3. It makes it strange to call it a separate trilogy in my head. I don't know. That's where I'm coming from with it. It's so dependent on the story from the first trilogy that it doesn't feel like it's a quote unquote new trilogy or
that's fair.
New series.
So here's a question to parse that though. Is the Star Wars sequel trilogy you kind of need the original trilogy to make perfect sense of everything that's going on in the sequel trilogy.
Well, I mean, that gets kind of muddy. I think it made sense right away because it went 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. It was a prequel trilogy. Now with the sequel trilogy, I'm going to stick with muddy as the descriptor.
I was waiting for you to try to figure out what you were going to say about it. But no, I agree with you, I think is the point here. I think that you would be doing a disservice to yourself to start in either sequel trilogy. So for whatever reason, you haven't read the first couple Red Rising books, I would recommend you stop here. You go back and read those and then jump in because there are obviously heavy spoilers for the original trilogy. But I guess I could see where someone could start here. I just, you'd want to go back. You'd read some of these things and be like, well, what the fuck? Why are they talking about this friendship that they had? What do you mean Darrow sold out all the Reds?
There's a lot of just interesting feelings when you come across some characters too that you would not have having not experienced all of them. So
yeah, you might not even recognize a character right away.
Yeah, maybe not.
Right.
We'll get into that, I'm sure.
So before we do that, we should talk about what we're drinking. Just to clarify, though, we are only talking about through chapter 6. Through chapter 6. Neat. What are you
Blame Crossland. I've got a gin and tonic. Just a straight up, couple ounces of gin. What is it? 7-ounce bottle of tonic water, a big old splash of lime juice, and an ice cube.
Classic.
Like, just a simple... I was running late. I had a bunch of assignments due, like, right when we started recording, so I was late because of that. So I just threw together the fastest cocktail I could think of. Doesn't involve shaking, doesn't involve really measuring at all. I didn't measure the gin, so I don't know. we got to chatting like we do during the pre-show, so I finished that, and now I have a small glass of scotch in front of me instead. And then following that up, I've got what I think is my first like ultra local beer that I'm having on the show. Ultra local,
nice.
As in like from the city, or rather the surrounding city from where I live, as opposed to just from the state. So I've got the Irish Red from Bad Habit Brewing Company out of St. Joseph, Minnesota. They've made waves within the brewing industry, especially within Minnesota, for the last several years. Awesome dudes, great brewery, and great art. It's all the same artist. He works there. Mo is his name. Yeah, just solid Irish Red.
That's super cool. I can speak to the quality of Bad Habit from when I've A, been like back in Minnesota, and B, when I lived there. It was just freshly opened, and they had some crazy great beers, including, like the red IPA style is one of my favorites. It's underutilized because it's just malty and delicious, and does not get.
This is not a red
does not
IPA.
Get made enough.
This is just a red ale.
Irish Red, right?
Yep, Irish Red,
right.
But yes, they do have I think they had a red IPA at one point.
They definitely did. I remember them having it because I was like, "This is just better Surly." This is just better Furious.
Exactly.
Yeah. So for sure. Good picks.
Yeah.
I am kind of boring this week in my own way. I'm having another Juan Collins. I had this in the episode with Howler Pod, but it was really good. And I still had a leftover lemon and the tequila and the club soda. So I just did it again. And I'm not disappointed. Actually, I skipped the simple syrup. There's supposed to be a little simple syrup in this. It tastes really good without the simple syrup, to be honest. It doesn't need the sweet.
Good. Yeah, I can imagine that. Just kind of like a tequila spritzer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, basically. It's got like, it really highlights, without the syrup, without the sugar, it really highlights the tequila that you're using. So if you're using a really good tequila, that becomes, the palate that you're really tasting it through. It's not just a delivery device for a lime flavored alcohol drink, for instance.
Yeah.
Which is kind of what the other one feels like, but.
Yeah, I can see that. Tequila has such good flavors that it can present, if it's a good tequila, that get completely overshone by sugar. So.
Right. Yeah, and that's also why I adore mezcal. With that, let's get into the chapters. So the first thing I want to talk about is the prelude. The prelude is fucking beautiful. Yeah, fine, whatever. Prologue, prelude, preamble. They can preludes, preambles, and prologues can be very difficult, especially when you're jumping into a new book series. They kind of set the expectations. They set the ground floor. It's the first thing that people are really reading inside of the book. And man, the beginning of Iron Gold is just incredibly well written.
So this whole prelude, we talked about Team No Hype in the last episode, and how we don't watch trailers or anything. If they were to adapt this book into a TV show, using the prelude as just the straight up trailer for it could be really fucking cool.
Yeah, I mean, you could even use it as the intro, right? It reminds me of the Raised by Wolves intro in a way. I don't know if you've seen it or watched that yet. It's very reminiscent in a lot of ways. It's got this very high sci-fi feel, this kind of singy tone. I just imagine a big... You watched the Snyder Cut, right?
Nope.
Did you watch the beginning of the Snyder Cut with the Aquaman scene? Okay. Well, within that scene...
I learned that it was all in 4:3 ratio, and I decided I don't want to fucking touch it.
Fine. Totally cool. all that I was trying to hearken to is there's a moment there in the movie where there's I want to say they're Norse women. I do not remember the specific region, but they're singing a mournful song, right? And I imagine you would be panning over these different moments with this just single mournful song over top of it all. And it would totally work as either the intro or the trailer, like you said. Mm-hmm. You don't need dialogue at all. As the actual thing itself shows, you don't need dialogue. This is all third person, which is fascinating.
That's an interesting point. I didn't even consider that.
Yeah, it's all third person. I think it makes sense. To me, I also get, like I said, it could also be the intro to that show, right? I get very heavy, like Avatar, when the Fire Nation attacked kind of moments where it's broken up into these 4 distinct segments: the Fury, the City, the Bombs, the Reaper.
Yeah.
You know, it just has those kind of distinct sectional feelings that you could pull off. So what I want to do here to kind of start off the episode is just chat about each of those paragraphs a little bit. So we'll start with the first, which is the Fury, which is about, we learn her name a little bit later, but it's Atlantia Al Grimace, the final Fury of Octavia. We don't learn a lot about her, of course, just we get this image of the families kind of behind her. What'd you think?
Well, there's a fucking eagle.
Yeah. Right?
So who dat?
Who dat indeed.
Who dat that's all I took away from it, honestly. Like, that's all I really focused on was who dat.
Are you curious about Atlantia at all?
Yeah, I am. We know Aja was kind of the really intelligent fighter. Moira was more of the diplomat, as far as we understand. So it'll be like, what is the sort of strength of Atlantia? Has that been discussed at all yet?
Not at all. She was named right here.
No. I know
inside
not.
of.
I know by name, but
oh no, yeah, her strength has also not been discussed.
Okay, I didn't remember if they like talked about sort of the aspects of the Furies in an abstract way in probably book 2. But I don't think they got that detailed about it.
No, yeah, they only brought him up as they presented themselves to Darrow, which I think is a gift of the first-person perspective that we can actually now start to take into consideration now that we have multiple perspectives. We'll talk more about that later, but it is interesting. We now potentially know more than some of our characters do.
Interesting.
So, the Fury. Anything else there?
No, that's what I took.
The Eagle. Okay, yeah,
Yep,
Screaming Eagle.
There's, I guess, what are the other sigils that are mentioned? Just because... There's a centaur, eagle, sphinx, and the crown skull of her father's house. So
the second paragraph here is the city, which we find out to be Tyche. The jewel of Mercury is described as a city hunched in fear between the mountains and the sun. And I think that that's so fantastic to think that a city could be hiding from the war that's coming, hunched and like cowering. So interesting. So visceral.
Yeah, but also like it makes it seem quaint and out of the way, probably not on a major trade path.
But it's the jewel of Mercury. It's like by all accounts, when I hear jewel, I think like the biggest, or I think like Abu Dhabi and like.
I can understand that. I took it as like has the most stunning views and is like kind of the tourist destination.
Okay. Yeah, I see that.
Getaway.
That makes sense. I mean, it's also a bustling metropolis, right? So it's described as that, but the streets are empty. You know, under normal circumstances, it would be busy. It was so miraculous that it made Lorne cry in his youth, right? Like,
yeah,
that's a whole thing.
Lorne seems like the kind of guy who would cry a lot, though.
Oh, man. So the city that Lorne's lamenting about, I think it's really interesting because the only people that remain there, this is still under the grasp of the society remnant, are the poor, repressed colors who will be inevitable collateral damage from the bombing that is about to occur. All of the lives that are about to be lost in this attack, which is a statement of war, a statement of conquest, but is also simultaneously going to cause a bunch of civilian casualties.
Yeah, but so is any sort of military strike at this scale.
Yeah, right. I just think that it's interesting that they aren't doing the right damage. You know what I mean? Like, they're not actually killing anyone of importance. They're only going to be killing the low colors. They don't know that, but we know that from the third-person perspective.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that there's not a militaristic presence here. We know that the Fury's here, and a bunch of, like, Peerless Knights? Is that what they were called?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, so there's something important here, militaristically.
Right. Mercury is obviously important, and the whole thing is very important. All that I mean is that, like, there's clearly, we're given the lens of this young orange as a point to realize what's about to happen to the low colors, which are supposed to be freed.
The people know that it's happening as well. That's the kind of fucked up thing.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't a surprise attack.
You mean?
Everybody.
Yeah.
They know it's coming. The father of the little orange girl, like, knowing that there's nothing that he can do to save his family.
Just haunting. Just what a way to start off a book, man. You start off with the Fury perspective, and then you move to a poor family that's about to get bombed to death. And then you shift to the bomb's perspective, like flying down onto the city, carrying the weight of the newest empire under the sun. Like, fuck.
If I had to choose, I'd pick that perspective to be.
The bombs versus the children.
It seemed the coolest. Maybe the stoic old lady that's staring into the pond, but
it's so shocking because I think that this intro, especially these first two or these middle two sections here, paint kind of the true brutality of war. Like, the reality is that they didn't choose a side. The Orange family didn't choose a side. They didn't have a choice in the matter, and yet here they are. They're going to die.
Isn't that kind of the case for any single family or any single person in a war-torn country?
Of course. And I think that's what he's hearkening to, is that it's easy to miss a lot of these things when you think about the original Red Rising trilogy, is all of the collateral damage in superhero movies, right? Like, you don't think about collateral damage. If there's one thing that I liked about Batman versus Superman, it's that you start in Ben Affleck Batman's perspective, and you see Superman and all of the damage that him and Zod do to the city and all the people that they kill. And this is that, but for the Republic, for the society.
One could also kind of argue that paying attention to it and concerning yourself with it is tactically the wrong move, and tactically puts you at a disadvantage in the war that you're involved in.
Yes, for sure. I think it's just talking more to the humanity aspect, right?
Yeah.
We're not in Darrow's perspective. Darrow doesn't think about it this way, as we learn later, of course, when Dancer brings it up to him.
He did, though. For a long time, he was concerned with the well-being and safety and prosperity of the average person, naturally, based on his upbringing. But tactically, he could have done.
It's not always the best move.
It's never the best move. If I'm learning anything, like, if you're going to win, you're going to cause collateral damage, and you have to kind of build that callus and not care about it.
Oh, I'm so excited for this novel. You have no idea. It's so fun. Okay.
I'm worried I'm going to come across as a fucking psychopath.
Well, so here's the reality, PJ, is that this is the ultimate, this is the quandary, right? Especially now that we're being pulled into multiple perspectives, it's what perspective is right on a conflict to some degree. What's the right lens to view war through, and revolution and change? And I'm so glad we're doing. Of course, I'm so glad. This is really why I want to drag you through the series to get to this book.
Can I answer that? Because I think the answer is top down and abstraction, and looking at the population as a single organism, not as individual parts. I think that's how you get shit done and how you get things changed. But being presented with more nuanced and more like.
Well, yeah, you've got the complexity of the three different chunks of the society or humanity at large not agreeing with each other,
right,
and being separated by values.
No,
it's interesting.
I agree. Like, I'm really excited to get into this book, but
the debates of this book are so much more philosophical.
I feel like I'm gonna know what side I'm on.
No, that's okay. I'll be interested to see. Because it's going to be a fun time. But I think that this is just beautiful imagery.
Oh, yeah.
Painting. It reminds me very much of the Tony Stark moment too. Keep going to fucking superhero movies today. In Iron Man, when he sees his own like bomb fall next to him with his own name on it, it gives me those same kind of feelings, because we're watching kind of this bomb fly by and we see the Quicksilver logo on it, and we kind of have this understanding that we have regular companies that were in charge of communications shift their business production into war, because war is also profitable, and that drives Quicksilver at the core. So okay, the final paragraph here. We spent a lot of time in this prelude. The Reaper. There's an iron rain falling, with the Reaper leading the charge in his red armor. I was actually asked by one of our fans to read this line, so this is specifically for you, Blood. Appreciate you asking. I adore this line as well. Men call him the Father, Liberator, Warlord, Slave King, Reaper, but he feels a boy as he falls towards the war-torn planet, his armor red, his army vast, and his heart heavy. Oh, it's that good shiver you get from good Pierce Brown writing, you know? It's so good.
Yeah. These titles, a lot of them make a lot of sense. Slave King specifically it doesn't necessarily carry the same like positive connotation that the rest of them do. I mean, Reaper technically doesn't. Same with Warlord, but given context, it makes sense. Whereas Slave King, it makes me wonder if that is a title used positively or negatively towards him.
I mean, it feels pretty negative.
It does.
Because he's not the king, right? Like, Dancer makes a really big point of that later. You were not elected to like make decisions. So
I'm guessing
it's interesting.
The people that are of the same disposition as Lyria probably call him Slave King.
Okay.
That's my little guess. Because I don't think that
hypothesis.
comes up again in this section, does it? I don't think so.
No, I don't think so. Not in this one.
I could see how it could be spun positively.
What would that look like?
I mean, he was a slave for all of his life, and he rose to almost unlimited power within the society, right?
Yeah. Yep. There is a strange kingliness about him.
Yeah. Whether or not he wants it, people treat him that way.
So, anything else in the prelude?
Oh, I mean, we didn't even mention it. The little orange that gets blown to smithereens was trying little Reaper scythe in the fogged up window.
Oh, yeah.
Before she gets obliterated.
Which is even worse because he believes in the revolution. Thank you for reminding me of that moment. Christ.
We don't know that she dies.
I'm depressed now.
All right,
this first section is depressing.
Hear me out. If what's her face? The
Lyria?
Atlantia. If she survives this, which I'm thinking she probably does. If she survives this, maybe Little Orange Girl does too. She's in a house as opposed to just by a lake. Feels more protected.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I guess the reality is that we know that Atlantia took Thrax's arm in battle. So that has to happen between point A and B because time passes between the prelude and the beginning.
Maybe she gave that arm to Little Orange Girl.
I don't think it was a gift. I'm going with no.
No. All right.
No.
Well, in that case, let's keep going.
Yeah, we're definitely going to keep rolling
ideas. Here. All right.
Yeah, this one time. So we get into part 1, Wind, and we've talked a lot about we've joked and jested a lot about intro quotes, and I do find it funny ultimately that this quote here at the beginning is a quote that is from outside the novel, while all of the rest of the quotes in the series are in universe. But technically, anything that happened on Earth before the Conquering is in universe. So
that's bullshit.
I don't give a shit.
Know it.
It's so good though. So the quote here is there is a
poor... let me poke a hole in that theory though.
Okay.
Right now we are in this universe.
Correct.
Hypothetically, based on your argument, we are also in their universe. So in their universe, we, several hundred years before them, have a book about them.
Dude, I can't wait until we read The Dark Tower. Can't wait to talk about multiverses in a really big way.
Oh, dude, I do love multiverse, as you know from us reading Blake Crouch together.
Yes, yeah. Which is the entire concept behind The Dark Tower, which is why it's incredible. Anyway, yeah, okay, fine. Obviously, this book wasn't published. It's not really our Earth, but we can assume up to a certain point that it was our Earth. We know that the 21st century, fucking, what was it called? The aesthetic of the 21st century, that fucking...
ostentationism?
Ostentationism, that's what it was. That Quicksilver and all the Silvers kind of worship.
The more and more I think about it, the more I think it's just like surreal memes. Like that's ostentationism, is just surreal memes.
And like strangely depressing works of TV show, like strangely depressing forms of media that continue to evolve and adapt. Like Craig Mazin went from Chernobyl, which is an incredibly depressing real event, to now creating the Last of Us series, which is an incredibly depressing zombie post-apocalyptic thing. It's just like it escalated. It got worse. Anyway,
would you say
the quote here,
that shit escalated?
I would say that, PJ. I do think that shit escalated.
Interesting.
So there's a poor blind Samson in this land, shorn of his strength and bound in bonds of steel, who may, in some grim revel, raise his hand and shake the pillars of the commonweal wheel, till the vast temple of our liberties, a shapeless mass of wreck and rubbish, lies. This poem is so clearly referencing what could happen to Darrow.
Oh, certainly.
Right.
I would like to point out to everybody listening that in our notes, Crossland, instead of commonweal, it is womanwheel.
Which is why I stumbled over it.
Just wanted to call you out for that one.
Yeah.
Is it actually supposed to be commonweal?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's a poetic form where it removed the th for wealth because it couldn't use the additional.
Everybody, let's get into what Crossland and I argue about all the time, which is rhyming.
We're not talking about near rhymes.
Poetry.
We're not talking about near rhymes.
I know, but Crossland is one that goes to bat for near rhymes all the time, and I won't stand for it. This feels like that
nerd
bullshit.
goes to bat for. No, it's a form thing. It's totally a form thing.
All right.
Totally a form thing.
I believe
which means that it's some bullshit.
I still think it's bullshit.
Some form things I think are a little bullshit, but they do contribute to a cohesive way of enjoying a piece. You know, just like what are the really weird like 7, 10, 7 syllables? What are those called?
Like,
Haikus?
Haiku 575. But I guess
that's what it is. This is not free verse. This is fitting one of those formats. I couldn't tell you
this
which
is
format
the no
th well studied.
No th format.
Well, some poets abuse th and some like to cut it out because they didn't like the sound it made. So
that you said nothing right there. You said absolutely nothing right there.
Call it taste.
Okay.
Shakespeare would like either emphasize or cut out depending on the character. It's not really a character trait, but it's real. Anyway, talking about the quote itself, though.
I would like to talk about the man whose middle name is Wadsworth, which is fucking hilarious.
Have you not heard of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow?
I have.
Ever? Okay. Okay.
I just think his name's ridiculous, and it should be mentioned that.
Got it. He was the first person to translate the Divine Comedy into English. Like that's his original claim to fame. And he wrote Paul Revere's Ride.
Right.
Cool.
Okay.
Anyway, among many other things. But yes,
didn't
Wadsworth
use a single th in the entire book,
including that his middle name has a th. So like, Wadsworth for some reason.
Henry Wadsworth.
That's right. Wadsworth for some reason makes me think of a toad. I don't know why. But it just makes me think of.
That's exactly what I was imagining.
Yeah, I just think very frumpy on a fucking river lily, just sitting there staring at the water, waiting to die.
Lethargic,
in the sun.
Droopy man,
but a frog man.
Well, I mean, his features kind of blend between man and frog. Is he man? Is he toad?
Why are we still talking about this?
He has many warts.
He has many warts. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's because we have an intro to a book to talk about. Okay, so chapter 1, Darrow, Hero of the Republic. So I find this so interesting because we start off in chapter 1, we start with a very different Darrow, and he is very weary. Like literally the first word of the entire book is weary, which the first word of the book outside the prelude, right? So the first word of the actual novel. And it really sets this tone for him. Shut up. Quotes set context, not story. But yeah, so like it sets this up to be a very pained Darrow, and we get this very different picture. What do you think of new 33-year-old Darrow? I
mean, I felt like age has done to him what age has done to any plucky 20-something that becomes a 30-something. Like
I don't feel disenfranchised yet.
Not yet. You're not 30 yet.
Oh, fine.
All right. No.
Look at Erin.
Yeah, look at Erin from the last episode. She was a fucking mess. Stoic and cold and guarded.
Abused by war.
Obviously. No. Time has grown calluses over Darrow. And we had our callus discussion about Octavia, which she had, a couple centuries to develop those calluses. I know she wasn't that old, but she felt that old.
Like 50 years, which is still nuts. Yeah, as a leader.
She was a leader for 50 years. And we talked about sort of the calluses that she had to build up. And it feels like Darrow in this 10-year span has built those calluses up in a very similar way, in that he is emotionally just not as in tune with himself. He's not leading by emotion so much as he was in the first trilogy.
Yeah, he's coming to contend with a lot more of the reality of what's here, right? And he's starting to sort of deal with and unpack those different components. Man, I can't help but reference a lot of other media today for whatever reason, but I can't help but think of sort of there's this like triumph around him. He's coming home, this victor of war. He's walking in, and have you played Warcraft 3?
With you?
No.
And your
you didn't play the campaign, sadly. No. I don't know why I asked. I actually knew the answer to that question.
You did.
There's a moment where Arthas comes home after having purged the scourge from Northrend. I say purged in quotes because the impression from Lordaeron is that he's won this war. He walks into the chamber, and the turn of the moment is he's actually become corrupted and is about to become the Lich King of the Scourge, the leader. He kills his father and kills the council, blows up Lordaeron. We don't quite go that far with Darrow here, but the sort of like weight of the clunks and everything else, and the sort of pace and timbre of his thoughts just feel very reminiscent and cold.
I mean, we're not even 10% into the book. Like, it could happen.
Yeah, I just get similar vibes for whatever reason. That's where my head goes. It's crazy. It's interesting for me to say that I actually really like sequel trilogy Darrow and kind of this jaded attitude, because he does feel like like you said, he's developed those calluses. While it's been off screen for us, we have an understanding of what's had to have happened to bring him here.
And I mean, I brought up the Octavia thing because we explicitly get a quote from him saying that in life I hated her, but in death I understand her. Mm-hmm. So there's a pretty crazy weight to even though he's not sovereign, Mustang is, so like he kind of lives vicariously through that, but even as not sovereign, he is leading a people and has that weight on his shoulders. So those calluses are probably formed in very similar ways as Octavia's were.
No doubt. And I think that he's starting to find that. He maybe doesn't have the same calluses that Octavia has, but I think he's developing similar calluses to Lorne's more than anything else, especially with the way that he reminisces about family later.
I'd be curious to take the time to really dig into those two characters again and see how different those calluses actually are, because I don't know if they're that different. They're just in different positions.
Between Lorne and Octavia?
Yeah.
Interesting. We'll have to finish the series and then evaluate that, but I know, we can do that.
Is it Howler Pod that's going through character breakdowns?
So Howler Pod's already done it. They've already done character breakdowns. Each character, or maybe a character pairing, which character pairing that they break down is Lorne and Octavia. They take like an hour and a half to go through 2 or 3 characters and talk through their whole arc throughout the series. Hail Reaper is also doing character and moment breakdowns as they're moving through, but they're doing them kind of book by book.
Okay.
So I assume by the time they get to Dark Age, they will do breakdowns including those components as it stretches throughout the series.
It'd be interesting to see either of those podcasts see their breakdowns of Lorne and Octavia side by side and see what they glean off of that.
Yeah. I can tell you that you can't listen to those episodes.
Oh, I know. I'm well aware.
Okay.
I'm just like, I finally had actual tangible interaction with some of the people
in the community.
Now, as opposed to just you doing it. So now I feel connected. In a way that like, I feel like I'm able to talk about this now.
You are very able to talk about this with me at whatever point you want. And sometimes we do it in front of a microphone, but that's fair. I totally understand.
We always do it in front of a microphone. It's whether or not we're recording.
So we're introduced to a lot of characters here as well with familiar backgrounds, right? We talked about Atlantia Algrimus. My God, I'm going to pick a way to say this. I think it's Atalantia is the way that it's spelled.
Atlantia.
It could be Atlantia. I don't think so. I think it's Atalantia. Atalantia. Yeah. It's a weird one. I'm not 100% on how to spell it. Anyway, Atalantia Algrimus, daughter of the Ash Lord and the Final Fury. We also learned that she took a new character as well, Thraxa out Telemanus, who's alluded to in the previous series, but not strictly named. Her arm in combat, so Thraxa has a metal arm. Very cyberpunky, very good. Mm-hmm. And another Telemanus.
But why not carved?
That's an interesting question. Why not carved? Maybe because a metal arm might be better than a carved arm?
I mean, it should be.
It should be, right?
I would think that anything bionic is better than puny mortal form, but
Flesh bones. Yeah, I would generally agree with you. I think the other part of that conversation is on the battlefield, you're not going to have it carved necessarily. You would have a metal arm perhaps ready to go.
Ready to go? I don't know, man. That's a fucking surgery.
Well, yeah, a yellow's going to have it ready to go versus like you've got a whole like rehab process with like... It's not like you're going to plug and play after you get your arm chopped off. I'm not saying that. You're going to have a surgery to put the metal arm on. You're going to have a little bit of rehab, but I can't imagine it's what Darrow has gone through with the carvers, right? Like the intensity of rehab for a metal arm is going to be lower than a full carved arm. Because you got to like work that thing out. Otherwise, you're like a big buff, like like the masturbate meme, right? Where they just have giant jacked right arms. Like it's totally what it is. We're introduced to a lot of characters, like I've said before. I really like Thraxa as a character. She's a different female. She's another different female from Victra and Mustang. And I have to give Pierce Brown props for having so many multifaceted female characters inside of the story that all have entirely different personalities.
I will say she seemed to fill a similar role to Holiday in disposition. We haven't experienced her that much yet, but she seemed to kind of have like carry herself in the same sort of tough badass kind of way.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that she is a tough badass. She also comes off a lot like her mom, Niobe, who we're introduced to later, but she feels like you understand where there's intellect inside of the Telemanus family. Man, I just feel like I totally threw Cabax under the bus there. But at the same time, I feel like I'm kind of correct there. Cabax is very wise, but not necessarily... And knowledgeable, but not necessarily the most intelligent house or family.
Yeah.
But Niobe lends an entirely different lens, and Thraxa adds to that perspective. Mm-hmm. Daxo, of course, also being very intelligent. We're also introduced to Wolfgar, who's an Obsidian who was there in Golden Sun during the reign over Aegea. Severo was the one who gave him his razor, another moment between Obsidians and Severo.
Was that actually documented?
Wolfgar was not named, but I don't think that whole moment... I don't think that moment's documented. I think that this is an addendum. Like, we didn't see it from Darrow's perspective because Darrow was leading the charge.
If it's not in the first trilogy, it's not canon, man. You can't go back and retcon shit.
It's not really retconning. It's just describing more closely.
It's filling in the blanks. I know.
Yes. No, I get what you're saying.
I am a first trilogy purist. And...
It's the only opinion you can have right now, to be honest. So
I believe that all that's happened is what has been explicitly stated on the pages of those books.
And the new book that we're reading. So
that's blasphemy.
Severo and Sephi, and in the end, we see Mustang, the Sovereign, with a new Dawn Scepter with the 14-pointed symbol of the Republic. The star that we see on the edge of this book. It's great to see a lot of the familiar characters, you know, to kind of see them all come back. But the clunks as he climbs the steps have this physical weight between his like constant humming thoughts. And I think in particular, to me, I think this first chapter of the bunch of Darrow's is the heaviest, the most immediate. A lot of the rest of it is still really good, still really important. But this really conveys what time has done to our main character, the weight of a year away from home, away from his family, as he like clunks and he's thinking about it, and he's like, he's just weighing all of these different things, these different losses that have happened, while everyone around him is cheering the victor's return home for a conquering of a planet.
I mean, it's a little bit of a different take on a triumph, huh?
Yeah. It's like a little bit, like maybe 20% different. Like, it still feels like the old society because this doesn't feel...
I meant more through Darrow's eyes and how he's perceiving it. Yeah. Like, it is not the pomp and circumstance that he kind of took in the first time, which ended in...
Yeah, in Golden Sun, right.
That's the other thing, is going through a triumph when last time you did this, half the people you loved got fucking murdered and you got taken and put into a box for a year.
Yeah, I mean, there's the assumption that this maybe happened each time a planet was conquered, like when they reclaimed Mars, when they claimed Earth. But I think your point stands, though, is that Darrow's used to coming back and being afraid of whatever the consequences are for whatever the actions he decided, right? And this time, he understands that he went directly against what the Senate wanted to do in relation to what had to be done for Mercury, because he made a decision that was out of line. We don't get that until later, but he's kind of also bearing his head because he knows what's coming.
Yeah, I mean, they voted on it, and they voted against doing this.
Right. And Darrow was like, fuck it, Omnisphere Lupus, and did it anyway.
I mean, that excuse only works a couple times, right?
Right. Yeah. Only a handful. Maybe. And it's that whole king question. We'll get to it when we talk about Dancer, but it's definitely an interesting point. One of the things that I think has an interesting dichotomy of weight here in the beginning of the episode, or in the beginning of the book here, is Severo specifically makes a reference to a classic Roman phrase, which is, remember, you are but mortal. In ancient Rome, the slave who held the laurel crown to be gifted to the triumphant commander would walk behind him and whisper this phrase continually before crowning the victor at the end of the ceremony. We probably know it best in the modern day society as memento mori. It's a common phrase in a lot of different sci-fi pieces. It was used most recently in the Punisher show a couple of times, but was definitely brought back to life for the most part by Stoic Ryan Holiday, and is a classic refrain from Epictetus, from Seneca, from Marcus Aurelius, and is generally considered like the calling card of Stoic philosophy. I really like it from Severo specifically because it appears to have a little bit more bite when you understand that the intent is for it to be a humbling phrase. Like, dude, get out of your own fucking head. It's not that big of a deal. And that kind of shit. Like, that's clearly what he's playing into. But at the same time, it carries that historical weight that I'm sure that Darrow is imparting into it, which is, Severo's doing it as like a jab, as a joke, but Darrow is internalizing that as the weight of the crown that he carries.
Yeah, I think the weight of the phrase itself kind of lends itself to additional interpretations, but memento mori is, as far as I understand, based on like me not being a super like well-read Marcus Aurelius scholar, but being connected to you who talk about Stoicism all the time. Like, memento mori is what I think of when I think of Stoicism. So having that phrase, but not being like intricately and academically linked to it, I can think of so many different ways that it can be used without necessarily like falling in line with what it was actually intended to be used as. Like it is a vague phrase that has very specific connotations, but that only matters if both people listening to it or saying it are well read enough to understand it.
This is interesting because I totally agree with you. This almost feels like an inside joke or an inside commentary between Pierce Brown and the readers, if you know that it's a Stoic phrase, but he says it in English as opposed to saying it in Latin, so that it still plays off kind of like the joke that it should.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a dichotomy there of how you should approach the response to that phrase, and just really kind of digging into the characters' backgrounds to understand what they would think of that phrase without necessarily the popular connotation of what memento mori means in Stoicism.
Yeah. No, exactly what you're saying. It's about the connotation of the moment, and it's not. It's an interesting, like, that entire paragraph plays kind of like a dual hander where it's, if you know, if you don't, it still works. Yeah. It's interesting for sure.
It still works, but it could work in a way that's not necessarily like in line with the ideas of Stoicism.
If we take it without any knowledge at all and you're just reading it, he's like, dude, remember, you're just a guy and you're gonna die.
Is as far as like bringing it into like contemporary terms and contemporary as in like the last 5 years, because this isn't that contemporary right now, but is YOLO just memento mori? But with a little bit more like risk involved?
Yeah, YOLO has an implication of taking risk versus Memento Mori has the connotation of, there's like a humble connotation of leaning before your life and understanding that your life is limited. So like YOLO means like, let's go actively do said thing, versus Memento Mori is a reflection of, why don't you do things? Why don't you choose to celebrate moments,
that feels,
or humbling itself as well?
That feels like you could argue they're the exact same thing. Like I'm not saying that they necessarily are, but you could argue it in that.
I think context is really important. Though.
Context is important, but
YOLO could be Memento Mori in a completely different society that didn't use it as an escapist ploy to go do drugs in a bathroom.
But what ancient Roman didn't want to go use drugs in a bathroom? I feel like every one of them did.
But Memento Mori wasn't said in that context. It was said by slaves to the conquerors. Like that's
Do you
the
think
context.
They didn't want to go do drugs in the bathroom? I think they did. My point is, don't watch life kind of pass you by. Live it. Kind of feels like the same core argument to be made.
Yeah, but remember, you are but mortal is.
Yeah, like you're not going to be able to reuse this time. Like you're going to die. Do something with your life.
Yeah, so I guess the difference is it doesn't actually push you to say do something with your life, right? That's the difference between Memento Mori and YOLO.
Yeah,
is the shove to do something proactive, because Memento Mori is used in the context of, this shouldn't bother me because I am only mortal, and or like, this isn't my kind of stress, or I can only choose one thing, which also feeds into YOLO. So there are components. There are definitely, like, if we're talking about a Venn diagram, there are moments inside of the middle, but they don't perfectly overlap.
I like to think if it's a Venn diagram, Memento Mori is like the big circle, and YOLO is entirely encompassed by it.
Yeah, that also works, actually. It would be what is that, a concentric circle?
Concentric.
YOLO fits into Memento Mori,
but not entirely. Like, it doesn't entirely equate itself to it.
Correct. It doesn't. Yes. Yeah. We still have to talk about showing up at the Senate chamber.
Oh, yeah.
So Darrow walks into the Senate chamber, sees his wife. He's very happy. And 140 senators, some of which are not very happy.
Yeah.
But his wife, Mustang, very cute. Looking very cute today.
Essentially just says sup, and he says sup. And that's the end
Basically.
of the chapter.
It's just like, what's up, wife? What's up, husband? And that's it.
Yep.
So we go into chapter 2, though. Chapter 2, which is, again, from Darrow's perspective, father. We're introduced right off the bat to Cedric Q. Plateau, and we get a look behind an interesting curtain. Despite a decade after upending the society, he himself still has trouble breaking habits, and I think that kind of speaks to the larger problem that would linger post-revolution, is that the lower colors, the lower castes from gold are going to have a tough time changing behaviors. And that is only made very clear by the Dominus Sir bit that happens.
I don't think it's necessary. It's been 10 years. I think the habits thing should have been passed by now. This reads more to me as kind of a meet the new boss, same as the old boss kind of deal.
An equivalence.
Yeah. Like, yes, there was an overthrow, but from his perspective, what's actually changed?
Man, that's interesting, because now you're dividing it by the high color line, and the high colors maybe don't view it as a serious change. Well,
no, not necessarily color, though. That's the thing, is it doesn't have to be by color. It can still just be by station, without necessarily, like, all that happened was you're not necessarily defined by your color, but hey, you're good at this. And there's still classes. So like you're not necessarily locked into this line of work as your color, but I mean, you're good at it. So will you do this for us?
So, okay. So what you're telling me is that Quicksilver, basically, by being the father of the Sons of Ares, made himself a gold.
Oh, entirely. But he kind of was before anything anyway.
Kind of, yeah. He just wasn't respected as such.
But, I mean, Silver, he was only not respected. He was, I don't know if I agree with that at all. He was the most renowned Silver, hands down, and was more renowned than most golds, even within the peerless gold society. He was within the top 0.1% of gold society, I would say, just from just from the fact that he was the boss to at least one peerless scar.
Yeah,
being Fitchner.
Interesting.
So I think he had already kind of, I don't know what more he would have gained by being a gold, and I feel like he would have lost some of his power by being a gold instead of a silver, because his position as a silver gave him access to a whole lot more than he would have as just kind of a trust fund baby, you know?
Yeah, it also gives him unambiguous drive to like push to the top, right? Inside of the silver class. And then on top of that, he doesn't have to abide by, not only is he not a trust fund baby, but he doesn't have to abide by the gold standard of like familial warfare,
right?
Which was clearly rampant in the previous society.
Yeah. Maybe a problem. Like,
maybe, just maybe.
Could have been a little bit of a problem for some people.
Maybe it like ended an entire bloodline, like maybe the Bolognas for the most part. There's maybe a couple of those left.
We know there's at least two, and I only know one by name, which is Cassius, but...
Iona Bologna? Just kidding.
Iona Bologna is alive and well in our hearts and on our tongues, but
very headless.
She is quite headless. Makes tongue twisters kind of pointless, huh? But we know there's Cassius, and we know that there's a screaming eagle behind the Fury in the intro.
The other one that we know that is for sure alive is Julia, which is Cassius's mom.
Okay. Oh, I guess we don't technically know that that the screaming eagle behind the Fury, which I can't remember her fucking name. I know it's like Atlantis or something like. Yeah.
Atlantia.
Yeah. So there's some peerless knight, quote unquote, with a screaming eagle standing behind her in that scene. We don't technically know that it's not Cassius, but it doesn't feel like it's Cassius.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like it's Cassius. Would agree. Because it would have a very different... You feel like they would have pictured his hair or something like that without saying his name. They would have like given him some shape, you know? But yeah, this entire color problem is a huge deal as it's pertained. Like you said, it's just such a problem of a handoff that like the higher colors definitely have, but also the lower colors are still subservient in their own way, right? Like Darrow still refers to the two people that are helping out in the garden as slaves, like Darrow does, or servants. I can't remember.
I think it's
one
servants.
of the two, but either way.
It
might be it's probably servants, but still, even servant isn't employee. You know, like
no servants employee.
Well, there's a slight difference. There's like I think of whenever
you hire a servant, it's just that's their station, that's their position. Their position is servant.
To me, servant implies indentured servitude, as though they're paying something off. I do understand what you're saying. Servant also potentially means that they're provided like housing and lodging inside of whatever, but that still feels like it's not as politically advanced or like societally advanced as I wanted the society to be. You know, the Republic post society.
I don't know if you can do that. Like I don't see a way for...
Wants and reality are two very different things, right? I agree with you.
Right, but just you have a shit ton of your population who have been undereducated or uneducated entirely. You have such a large society that you need people to continue doing the work that has been done by slaves, because otherwise, like, society as it is will cease to exist. And like there has to be some sort of transition, but you can't just go from slaves and menial workers to everyone being on a level playing field, because that's just not how society works. Like, it just won't work that way. You need the people on the bottom of the heap to keep doing what they're doing in order to keep everything going, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's also why Lyria's perspective is interesting, is because ultimately she's the perspective of what Deanna was warning against in the original trilogy.
Entirely. She is exactly what Deanna was warning against. But at the same time, she is in a different place, and she would call it a worse place. And a lot of people would, but at the same time, a lot of people would say it's better. Either way, she's not making any fucking money. She's not making any difference. She's not doing anything for the good of the society herself, individually. Because she wasn't a minor. Like, she was just kind of... Was she even a worker? Did she even do any work within the colony? I don't.
Yeah, silk threads, I believe. Because I believe most of the women were thread women.
Okay, well, that makes a little bit of a difference, but that filled up her time, so she didn't have anything to worry about, or she didn't have time to worry about everything else, I guess is where I'm coming from with that.
Right, which is where Darrow also opens up and briefly mentions a little bit later that, like, his mom was kind of abusive because of the loss of her father. Like, that was interesting. That was a wide swing that I didn't expect.
Yeah, it's just was she better off? I know she misses the mines, but was she better off in the mines? I don't know if that's the case.
Yeah, I don't think that's the case for anyone, but I don't think the assimilation camps are necessarily
They're
best,
not good.
Right?
They're not good by any stretch, especially when you get an infighting of the Reds that came from different colonies, and you have essentially a purging of her clan.
So no, I agree with you. What I think is really interesting is and this is skipping ahead a little bit, but within Lyria's perspective, right? She makes reference to all of the Lambda folks who act as though they're a part of Darrow's tribe, even though they're no more related to Darrow than they are a bat, I think is the terminology that she uses.
Yeah.
And so when you look at it through that lens, she's not related to she's not similar to the Gammas. It's just that this mutual hate has flown out of so many different, because there are thousands of different mines underground with all of these different societies. There are going to be groups. They've been armed by society to hate each other because they're working towards earning the laurel, and only one group gets the laurel. And so,
well, but we know that Gamma was working with, or in some respect, Gamma had the sort of
Gamma and Lycos
favor,
right? Gamma in Lycos for sure had the favor
of the society,
right?
Which we don't hear her talk about that at all.
It might not have been true in every mine. They probably pick mostly the mine that drives the highest average, right? That would make the most sense. From, if you're looking from like a copper silver perspective, the way that they're going to manage that is like,
no, if you're going to do that, you're going to actually like award the laurel to the person that like provides the best, like provides the most. Like, you're going to have a fair fight if you're actually going to reward actual like tangible results. We talked about this with Alia, and how like across every color the society has a favorite slave.
True.
I would have agreed with you without that sort of perspective of the fact that Alia Alia knew everything. She was in conversation with the Golds, but felt like,
I guess we just don't get that from Lyria, right?
No, because like she's not part of the leadership, but she was living effectively and relationally kind of a cushy life within the mines, being part of Gamma.
We don't
necessarily know that.
But I see what you're saying when you extract it from the Lycos situation. When you extrapolate from what we know about what was going on in Lycos, that makes sense.
So right. she was not.
I'll bend
from
a little bit.
Lycos?
No, Logolos.
She was from Logolos. And Gamma, is there any actual familial connection to Gamma of Lycos?
No, that was the whole point about the Lambda house claiming as though they're related when they were not related at all.
Okay.
Because a lot of the Reds are not related.
I'd be curious if there was a similar structure with Gamma in their mine.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we can chat more about that when we get to Lyria. Let's wrap up with the man. This episode today is all over the place. We've got a lot to talk about inside of Darrow's perspective, and I'm super glad that we're having these complex conversations about the color and the hierarchy and the systems, because I think that really comes to the front of the story to some degree at the beginning of Iron Gold, is the way that a lot of the shit actually works or doesn't work and functions, which is part of the reason that I love this book. Is it feels like it's a class on ethics and philosophy at first.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
Yeah, entirely it does.
So, and then the children, right? We go from Cedric to the children, and I love how casually Severo and Darrow bet the war trophies, like trading cards to gamble with on small things. And Darrow's kind of like not feigning interest. He's kind of like feigning interest. He's like, no, I'm not gonna give that away for that. Like, no big deal. I'm not gonna do that for that. But if you gave me the ivory tree of Falthy, maybe I'd do it. And then he takes the bet. And it's just, to me, that is a moment where you finally see Darrow and Severo again as they were before. And it just feels good. It's a good moment.
I mean, he loses anyway, right?
Darrow does lose.
Yeah. I loved the tree and the description of it. Initially, I thought it was like an ornately carved tree made of ivory. But it turns out it was just a fucking tree that Severo stole from a house on Earth.
Yeah, which is hilarious. It's so good.
I want to see his trophy room. I really do.
That would be a great thing to see, right? Especially after the 10 years of conquest that they've both been through. And no doubt they've been betting on other shit over time. They've traded trophies back and forth. This feels like a clear hint at that. We also get our first introduction really to Elektra and Pax, the children of these two madmen and their very intelligent wives. What do you think of the kids? So
Elektra was feral, like brutally feral, with like one person who has tamed her, and that's Severo. Like that. Yeah, that's like she is stone faced and just brutal. Like jumps into Severo's arms when they hug. Pax is definitely more reserved. There's obviously the fact that Darrow's been gone a lot that lends itself to not a like super warm relationship between him and his son, but obviously we see sort of the warm relationship between Severo and his daughter. I think Darrow more than Severo, like Severo seems like a broken person and a broken kind of personality, but he is who he is, and I think he's come to grips with that. He's fully understood who he is, and he's embraced it, and he's allowed himself to be like just jovially free with his child, whatever. Does he have more than one? He has more than one, right?
Severo Severo has 3 daughters right now with a 4th on the way.
Right. Whereas Darrow, even though like he's been gone and just absent in general from Pax's life, and he seems to kind of use that as an excuse, but he hasn't, like he is historically very kind of in his head and hasn't been able to be honest with himself about who he is and what he thinks and what he does. So I think that kind of feeds into the distance that he feels between him and his son. Especially because he knows, like he talks about being away, but we know that Severo he's away at the same time, in the same way, in the same station. There's something more to the distance between him and Pax than just the distance itself.
Oh man, you killed it. That was so good. Yeah, I have nothing to add there. There is a strange sort of foreign aspect to Pax and Darrow's relationship that I think that you described well. And there is meanwhile, we get the comparison and the dichotomy of the familiarity of Elektra and Severo.
Like if Darrow's not going to be open with himself about who he is, he's not going to be open with his son about who he is. And Severo is unabashedly Severo.
Oh man, what a good call. It's as though Darrow's lying for years and years and years maybe impacted his personal relationships in the long term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Who would have thought?
Interesting. Who would have thought that maybe not changing your behavior earlier and choosing to yourself, not being forced out. That's the interesting thing, right? Darrow was forced out. Darrow never chose to reveal his heritage or anything else. He was forced to. The only person he chose to reveal it to was Ragnar and Mustang. He did tell Mustang, but and that makes sense for their relationship. He did tell Mustang. He was very open with Mustang.
He told Mustang. I wouldn't call him I wouldn't say he was very open with Mustang.
Well, I don't think there are a whole lot of lies between him and Mustang.
No, but I never once got the idea that anytime Darrow talked about who he was and talked about him being a red and talked about like overthrowing the Sovereign, I never got the idea that it was just to bring somebody into the fold.
That's fair. That's fair.
It always seemed like I need this person, so shit, I've got to tell him what's going on.
That is very much the sort of rationale, especially even with Ragnar to some degree, right? It wasn't I need this person, but it was like I want him to be the leader. With Mustang, it was definitely I need this person.
Ragnar's the one kind of exception to the rule a little bit.
Yeah, right.
Or the closest thing to an exception.
Yes.
He needed Ragnar from the jump. He needed him on his side. But at the same time,
he could have taken a different Obsidian.
There was some genuine feelings with Ragnar when he was telling him it.
Yeah, there was a level of honesty with Ragnar that is absent most other places with Darrow.
Correct.
So great read on the kids. Great read talking about that. We once again run into the Telemanus women. Just some overthoughts on what you have on them, and also the way that the kids are being raised, right? In these like little packs of 9, which is, I don't know, maybe a little bit better than a murder gladiatorial dome where, they kill each other in 12 separate houses for supremacy.
I kind of want that to happen still, though.
Of course.
It was compelling fiction.
Well, yes, it was compelling fiction. Of course it is. That's why people love the Hunger Games.
Right. Exactly. People love this shit. Let it keep going. You've already got the battlefields.
What'd you think about Thraxa and Niobe?
I already talked a little bit about Thraxa in that I feel like she fills a similar role as Holiday did. Just kind of the stern, goal-oriented, and brutal, like, strong woman.
Yeah.
Niobe, I feel like I'm excited to see more of her. There's a lot more of a softness to her, but at the same time, she seems incredibly intelligent. I feel like I haven't gotten enough with her to really get a grasp on who she is. Not that I've gotten a great grasp on Thraxa either, but she seems to be a little bit more wear your heart on your sleeve as far as personality goes.
That's definitely, I think it's a good comparison and a good read of the two of them. It's interesting to think that Niobe is married to Cavax, right? Like,
yeah.
that's an interesting thing, right? Like,
I really hadn't thought about that much yet. I know from Aaron from the last podcast that Cavax is not in this story at all. So
womp womp.
I don't think it matters. And I think we should just ignore that relationship entirely.
Sure. That dynamic no longer exists. We've hand-waved it away.
We've hand-waved it away. Sophocles, I think, probably is just a background character that we see on the fringes. Whenever Pierce decides to mention that Sophocles is smelling some old lasagna in the fridge or something like that. I don't know.
Smelling some old lasagna in the fridge. Love it. It's good. We're good. Clears. So, yeah. No, I mean, man, I really like that. We already talked a little bit about Deanna, but I just want to make mention of the fact that she feels kind of penitent, and she definitely like penitent for the life that she has now and kind of the recovery and the medicine that she's access to because she's Darrow's mother, not because, but also in spite of the plight of the Reds, right? Because not all of the Reds, as we learn a little bit later, are doing that well. It's interesting.
I still think she's the big bad. And now, like letting the dragon go and getting a full night's rest to regain their hit points, we have let Deanna overcome some of the plaguing aspects of the stroke that she had in the past. So I think Darrow needs to take caution, and he needs to realize that this woman who may have raised him is going to be too powerful for him to overcome.
Could be dangerous. Could be dangerous. What a prediction, PJ. I'm so glad that you're convinced that Deanna is the villain of the story. I can't believe I didn't talk you down off that ledge when it happened originally, but here we are.
I mean, we know that Pierce Brown is having trouble writing the 6th book. He just scrapped whatever he's been working on. It's not going to come out this year. It's because he hasn't realized that Deanna's the big bad. But I got you, Mr. Brown. I got you. She's right there.
That, oh, man. The secret, real, original leader of the Sons of Ares the whole time. But also playing on the Sovereign side, you know, deep, long game hardball.
I mean, I could see that being faked.
I mean, anything and everything. Okay, maybe stretch that too far. Okay, but Dancer is also working and toiling in the same garden that she is, and that begins. Okay, so thinking about Dancer, they have this conversation about the war effort and a number of other things, and they have this very open conversation about kind of power and power dynamics inside of the society. That being that Darrow is not an elected official, first and foremost, and is disobeying the orders of the elected officials. He perhaps did the right thing by taking Mercury, but did not do the right thing by disobeying the orders. Did the right thing in his own mind by making the executive action. But what do you think? What do you think about the complex situation that Darrow and Dancer find themselves in?
Well, I think there's a little bit of some strange dynamics that they both find themselves in that Dancer has been advocating for and working towards the overthrow of the government that they found themselves under the rule of. And now that that's been overthrown, he's suddenly part of the government that kind of took its place. Whereas Darrow, while he's like an important figure within the Republic, he's not a senator. So he is still kind of like he hasn't been exposed to the same responsibility that would change his mind about the way to handle authority. And I'm not going to try to make any sort of argument on who's right here, but Dancer has conceded that his overthrow of power has ended, and we need to create power in the vacuum that we've created. Whereas Darrow, he killed the Sovereign, but his approach has always been a little bit counter to authority in pretty much every way. So it's tough to draw that comparison. Darrow seems to be still kind of acting in the same way that he was before the overthrow of the society, whereas Dancer has come to grips with the fact that they've planted a new power structure over the top of the corpse of the society.
Yeah, and they basically, like, I think that's a great read on it, like just implanting this kind of faux organization on the top layer makes a lot of sense. And also the trouble is, right, the Vox Populi, or this other group of low colors or assumed low colors, probably have a similar opinion to the Sons of Ares, but less extreme and more of like, if we extrapolate Dancer's opinion from the first series, Dancer had the opinion that golds should not be allowed to continue to rule or continue to be in any position of power.
There is there's a statement somewhere in here. I'm not sure if it's in this area. I'd assume it would be, where Dancer would call for a representative per capita of color, which would mean there'd be like 500 representatives of all the low colors to one representative of gold.
Yes.
Just strictly from population.
Right. The population representation. Right.
I'm sure I'm butchering, but I'm pretty sure it was 500 to 1. And I'm pretty sure it was based on population of gold to not gold.
Yeah, well, right, because the low colors are that way.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, like if you think about the Reds, they greatly outnumber everyone else. And so the representation is misrepresentative because every color has 10. You know, if you think about it, it's the way that people think about like the Senate in Wyoming, right? Like Wyoming has 2 senators. They shouldn't have 2 senators. That's the same amount of power.
I mean, but they have fewer they have fewer representatives, right?
Correct. We've got a bicameral house, which is a little bit different. This is a single cameral. But yeah. But the point stands, I guess, is kind of the comparison is what I meant.
Yeah, no, yeah. For sure, entirely.
I think that it's great to end this chapter on the line. You know what I mean. The Senate was elected. You were not. And kind of that obvious power difference, even between admittedly close friends as they like hold each other's hands walking through the meadow. So we've already talked about a lot of the politics of the sort of Vox Populi and things like that. We do enter chapter 3, Darrow, the fantasy, from the perspective of Victra re-entering the picture as very pregnant. We get a nice dinner with a lot of the friends. Balder, the obsidian friend of Pax, is still around. He's the one who pours Victra's wine. There's a lot there that's just homey. A lot of this chapter feels very warm, like a hearth.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. But we've already chatted quite a bit about the various politics that happen here. The only maybe add is that Victra's sort of semi-anti-union stance is interesting. And I think it speaks to the sort of prevailing dominant class thing that would obviously happen from a ruling class being changed into an equal class, but not having their capital changed, right? Because they're still in charge of the companies. They're still trust fund kids in their own way. It's inherited wealth. So,
right.
You know, it's not like that changes overnight.
No, it doesn't. Certainly.
It's an interesting point. And it's obviously contentious for Victra, but
yeah, but Victra she's always shown that side of her. Whenever she's had access to power, she has flaunted it. Even when she was just a member of the rebel Sons of Ares group, as opposed to being a full-fledged member of the new like government. She gets drunk on power really fucking easily, but she still maintains like she doesn't necessarily adopt malice, but she does lead her company in kind of a tight way.
Yes. In tight, you mean she is lean. Being very
like,
yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yep. I was going to lean into that definition a little bit. Lean. Haha. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Does that like
it totally makes sense.
Strike true a little bit?
Yeah. I think that it makes sense. I mean, she's obviously she's trying to run as profitable a thing as possible, right? And she's hitting this roadblock with a point in the compact, which is that everyone is allowed to unionize, which makes sense, and you know, is a right, especially of an oppressed several genuses of humanity that have been separated by centuries of genetic modification by this ruling class. They certainly have the right to unionize. That should not be removed from them because they have been, you know, disrespected for so long. And collective bargaining seems like the least we could do. You know,
yeah, that's pretty true.
Yeah. I just wanted to not skip over that. I know we've talked about a lot of the other political components here. So I like the little bit where we switch here to talking about something that totally skipped my brain the first time. It just didn't connect. And I thought that it was maybe fake because of the names and whatnot. And it was just meant to be implied. But Daxo says it was a bit like a Hieronymus Bosch painting come alive, describing Quicksilver's posse going to, I think, the theater. Bosch is a Dutch artist from the late 1400s to the early 1500s, which is interesting from a time frame perspective because I forget that like art is fascinating in the way that it's really timeless, like really good art, and Bosch is a really good artist.
There's some fucking weird shit in his paintings.
It is very strange. Highly recommend hitting his Wikipedia page to just check out some of the standard fare. But his paintings remind me of the sort of absurdist art within Monty Python and the Holy Grail, the sort of cross scenes that were done by, I think Terry Gilliam did those. He was entirely in charge of those. But those sort of like weird scenes where like the giant foot would come out and sort of the exaggerated features of noses and eyebrows, on like the monks and things like that kind of became part and parcel, but not comical, like not exaggerated for comedy, but exaggerated for
drama.
I don't know, the contrast sake. Yeah, for drama on the canvas. It's crazy. But the reason that he's compared here is because he paints moments of decadence and posses in particular. He paints small groups very well, which is what Daxo is pointing to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but at the same time, I liken the first time I saw some of his paintings, we were together kind of looking over some of them. I likened it to almost a like a Photoshop clip art kind of vomit over a page. Done much better than that, but every individual like subject is separate. It does not seem to like blend together between subjects. They are busts of people that are just kind of plopped on a page, one in front of the other.
Yeah, that one was really, really interesting.
That sort of style seemed to penetrate through most of what I saw.
Yeah, because you're talking about the I think it's Jesus at Palante painting, right? The one with the
specifically, yes, that one is aggressive,
but that feeds into everything else that he did too. We're not art critics by any means, but it felt obvious.
I'm looking upwards with my nose upturned at the screen and the microphone. No, I'm not a fucking art critic.
But it seemed like a very obvious and easy read on the entire piece as a whole. Like it seemed like that was clearly something he was going for, was sort of the hard edges on a number of people's faces, and then sort of Jesus himself had a very soft face, which was interesting. It felt like they were plucked from individual portraits, like you said.
Mm-hmm. Like it felt like somebody went through ye old Time magazine and clipped out people's portraits.
It's so true.
Taped them to a canvas.
And I think that speaks to the truly absurd moments that we're comparing it to with Monty Python. Little sketch bits that happen in between, where God shows up with his big face and his jowls drop in the puppeteering kind of way, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah. So Lorne, I mean, Darrow almost feels like Lorne in these moments, because man, the way that Darrow reflects on these, that's so good.
Well done.
I just find it so funny because Darrow feels so close to Lorne in these moments. He feels so similar. There's so many overlapping traits, and I can't help but think that this is exactly what Lorne was thinking, but with extra decades of experience, just exacerbated to the extreme. Yeah, which is why he was so protective of his family ultimately, and that's why he chose Darrow in that moment, knowing that he was gold. But specifically the line, "This is how life should be. This peace, this laughter." You know, I think that's the thing that any war hero would strive for is those times at home, but knowing potentially that you have to go back out there. And that's sort of the fantasy and the dread behind this entire chapter.
I don't know it off the top of my head, but I feel like this is probably a fairly well-explored trope of an active warrior with a family, as far as literature goes.
I wish it was better, at the very least in fantasy and sci-fi. I don't think it's as well explored.
Oh,
but
I'm not
definitely
talking fantasy sci-fi. I'm talking more like historical, like hero's journey kind of deal.
I would definitely hope so. I just haven't had that experience personally in my reading. There's only one other character that approaches this that I can think of actively in the things that I've read. And I don't want to talk about it because we're going to read that book series eventually.
Okay. I was going to say it kind of reminds me of Odysseus at a core level. I'm assuming that's not what we're going to read.
No, we're not going to read the Odyssey. I do understand where you're coming from there, though. So many of these stories, of course, are based on Odysseus and sort of that.
I mean, just
journey,
heroes' journeys in general.
Right.
I mean, there's
Joseph Campbell's. Yeah.
There's Odysseus. There's fucking, starts with a G. Like one of the first published like works of fiction. Shit.
Like Gilgamesh, like the Legend of Gilgamesh.
Gilgamesh. Yeah. Yes, that's the one I'm thinking.
Got it. Yeah, Gilgamesh is definitely, you're right. No doubt. I'm just trying to think of, I'm thinking contemporary. I'm thinking contemporary fantasy. I'm thinking a lot of those things because obviously there's so much foundational stuff that's there, especially the Odyssey is a great example. The closest that I can think of is there's some Michael Crichton books that can deal with this, but it's not a galaxy spanning thing. It's not like we're talking about in Alexander the Great in fiction, and we kind of, with Darrow, we kind of are talking about an Alexander the Great sort of character, sort of conqueror.
I mean, yeah, we basically are.
Yeah. I love the way that this chapter ends in this soft moment with Mustang asking Darrow to consider retiring and reflecting that these should be everyday moments, not occasional memories, that these like happy times should be forgettable and they should have so many of these logged that it doesn't need to be its own slide in the slideshow. It should be lost in the abyss of slides. And I really, for whatever reason this time, this chapter hit me particularly hard. And the sort of way that you might like lie casually to someone you love to indulge their fantasy temporarily, just, I don't know, it just hit. But then there's that like moment of acceptance that you have where you just know that it can't be that way. And that's where, Darrow kind of ends most of this chapter with, right? Where he says, "We played the game far too long to walk away. I take her hand. My wife is quiet and the fantasy drips away. Our familiar friend, Dread, creeps onto the balcony with us because deep inside, in the shadowy chasms of ourselves, we know that Lorne was right. For those who dine with War and Empire, the bill always comes at the end." And wow, it's just a sharp ending to what I feel like is it's a more deeply emotional moment than I think we've had in the series. There are emotional moments that are very emotional because they're earned through drama over time and payoff, like the end of Roke's life, for instance. But this is one of the most immediate, visceral moments without all of the prelude.
At the same time, it comes across as a little bit overly dramatic because there's no speaking of how can we finish this off and how can I tie up the loose ends so we can get to our goal of like having this be our everyday life. It is essentially, I will be doing this until I'm dead. And I don't know if that's necessarily the right way to look at it either. It seems like there could be a middle ground that Darrow is overlooking.
Yeah. He's definitely staring at the extremes. I don't know if there really is a middle ground for him. I think that there is a retirement path for Mustang, though. Like, Mustang could step out of being the Sovereign.
Yeah, but being the Sovereign doesn't seem to be the dangerous position, comparatively.
It doesn't seem to be the absent position. I would change dangerous to absent.
No, it's almost dangerous.
Well, I know that you meant dangerous.
Darrow is putting his life on the line despite having a family, and that's taking a toll on him. But he doesn't seem to be putting anything forward to try to like get past that part of his life.
So definitely understand the point of what you're saying and where you're coming from. I think what I'm trying to clarify is that I don't feel like Mustang is so worried about him surviving so much as it is about the life that they could have at home, right? And so Mustang, for the most part, is unwilling to give up the sovereignship, mostly because she knows that she can help her husband, it seems, right? And that's why they kind of, the dread and the fantasy sets in and washes away everything, is because she probably won't give up that position of power so long as Darrow is out there, because then she can have some kind of influence over his safety and security, even if it's not perfect, you know?
I get that. And this is going to come across a little bit cold, but if Darrow was of the mind that he's never going to stop fighting and never going to stop being on the front line of this, not just in like wartime, but in hypothetical peacetime as well. I get that he has Pax as a son, but it doesn't make logical sense to me that he would go through with marrying Mustang and starting a family. It seems like the more logical choice to let her raise the child without him, because he is constantly going to be at risk of being lost.
Yeah, but there's always the hope that it could be different, right?
But he's resigned, like he's completely resigned himself to the fact that it could be different. He has not put forward the idea that it could be different. Neither has she.
Correct. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that is also, PJ, agree with you. I think that's the dread washing over and erasing the fantasy. They both believe in the fantasy, but inevitably the fantasy comes to an end when reality seeps back in and changes.
I'm going to nitpick a little bit, and I know I know your meaning is the same as what I'm going to say. They don't believe in the fantasy. They hope for and want the fantasy, but they're doing nothing to try to fulfill it. They're basically just saying, wouldn't that be nice? All right, go rain hellfire down on another planet. See ya. See you next year.
Yeah, but I do think there's something interesting because this fantasy is cited as being a repeated fantasy that they have. But it feels like this was maybe based on the conversation that they have, it maybe felt like the most earnest version, and adding in the weight of Pax from the previous chapter, really starting to become a person and having a lot of negative feelings towards his father. That kind of complicates it a little bit more, I think. But I do understand what you're saying, where they've already pretty much accepted the fact that things aren't going to change. Mustang is basically softball pitching it, even though she knows she can't stop her husband, you know?
Right.
She's not going to stop him. And I think that this also gets back to a quote that Lauren said. I think it was obviously in Golden Sun. It's the only book Lauren's in. Technically. He's technically in Red Rising. He doesn't really say anything. But Lauren said something along the lines of, there's no peace for men like us. And that is exactly what this is. There's no chance that Darrow, now that he's committed to this life and this lifestyle, ever since that moment in Golden Sun when he didn't take the escape route and decided to take a different life, he has been on the warpath and cannot turn around. We leave Darrow for the week and Mustang for the week, reflecting in the vote that is now being rushed to the floor by Dancer, which leaves all kinds of questions in the air.
It does indeed.
So with that, we move into Chapter 4, Lyria. Welcome to the Worlds. Our first new character, Lyria. We talked about her earlier, of course. She's a Gamma girl with a large red family. I really love the line, "Welcome to the Worlds." It's this sort of like casual refrain throughout this first section, as though perfect liberation and salvation for the Reds has arrived in the form of Darrow's uprising and the liberation of Mars. And she gives a wonderful, jaded perspective on that whole thing.
Yeah, she does. She gives up until this point, entirely unique perspective. We haven't seen sort of a firsthand account of the negative things that happened in a refugee camp, and her life is rife with them.
Rife with starvation, rife with a number of things. So, I mean, this really made me feel like, especially the beginning of this chapter when she starts at like 16 or 17. I think it's 16. She starts the chapter at 16. It made me feel like very Fallout, like escaping the vault, right?
Yeah.
You escape into this world and you've been given all of this different dialogue, and you come out and you find out that everything is lies. As she says herself, that was 2 years and 1,000 broken promises ago. Like, wow.
I mean, yeah. Yep.
And welcome to the Worlds is really welcome to a tent that you're going to live in for a very long time.
But at least it's not a mine.
Yeah, but you also don't have like a life to live. No, oh, man.
Entirely. That was mostly sarcastic.
We find out a little bit more about Lyria, too. She's a Gamma from the mine of Lagalos. Gamma was a clan with...
Fucking Gammas.
Yes, fucking Gammas. Gamma was a clan within Lycos, but also within every other single mine. Within Lycos, they were the ones that were constantly at the throat of Lambda for the laurel, continually winning it. We learn all about her brothers, nephews, father, mom, the whole family, and how she does her best to support everyone as kind of the focal point of the family after her mother passes away.
Mm-hmm.
I really like the line, "I used to think my world is permanent," because I think it's so excellent at describing that single line. I think does such a good job of describing the loss of innocence really within her character. We've barely been introduced to her, and we already know that she's been stripped of something that she had before over the last 2 years, and that's stripped away from her because she has to take care of her family.
Yeah, her dad, who's kind of suddenly a potato.
Yeah. Yeah. This gets into chapter 5. These two chapters blend together fairly decently. Chapter 5, Camp 121, which is Assimilation Camp 121, which is such a friendly name. But talking about her dad, the sort of like death of her father after the passing of her mother is some incredibly relatable writing. It is so common with old married couples that you just wish that they could avoid this sort of pain that exists when they're separated from their long-term partner. But I felt like it was so well described. The line is, I don't recognize this man, this creature wearing my father's skin. It's visceral.
Yeah, it is. It's really, really well said. But understandable at the same time. Like this is somebody who has, because he goes basically comatose after moving out of the mines, correct?
Yeah. Yep.
So he has lost his entire life and then also lost his lifelong partner. So it's hitting even harder than it would normally, you know?
Definitely, because there's just this extra layer, extra element that he is kind of choosing to be this way, but he's also out of work, which was, so he like lost two foundational components to himself almost at the same time. And that's why he kind of like melts down into this nothing burger of a person is because of that. And I think that's why she's so resentful. You brought this up in our pre-show, but she uses the word "this creature." And you made a really good point about that being so dehumanizing to what he is.
Yeah, it's entirely dehumanizing. But at the same time, there's a parallel to the phrase "creature comforts" in that he has lost his wife, he's lost his life, he's lost basically fucking everything. He's essentially just vegetative. Does it ever say what he's actually doing every day? Is he sitting in front of the TV? Or the holocube? Is he just laying in bed? Is he comatose? Is he just kind of absent? I can't recall.
It does. Okay, so the section that we already talked about was, I don't recognize this man, this creature wearing my father's skin. It just eats and shits and sits there watching the HC. Still, I shove the anger away, feeling guilty for it, and kiss him on the forehead. I tuck his blanket in a little bit under his bearded chin and thank the veil there's no soil in his diaper.
I mean, he's a vegetable, essentially. And
almost by choice.
Seemingly by choice.
To some degree.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is tough to deal with, but not necessarily unheard of. It just it seems like she thinks it was in his control. And I'm curious if that's the case.
Yeah.
Or if he's actually just effectively brain dead.
Right. Man, it's a tough section to even think about to some degree, because he, like we said earlier, he was stripped of his identity in both the fact that and his entire worldview, where he thought that the roof over their head that was the rim of the mine was the sky. And when they go outside, he loses his job. He gains a perspective that there are other worlds than these. There's loses
a world
his
on top
wife
of the world
shortly thereafter. Yeah, and everything changes for him all at once. You know, you can't blame him, and at the same time, you can be really fucking mad at him and definitely blame him for putting this all in Lyria, right? Because she is now responsible for all of the other siblings in varying degrees. I mean, she has some older brothers, but she's also now taking care of some nephews of her sisters because she has to go.
Shouldn't this all be handled by the man of the house?
Good joke. Speaking of Tyrion, we'll get there. We'll get there in a moment. But man, I think this also feeds into kind of the sort of trope that happens very loosely that happens with her off the bat with the nephews watching the HC and talking about how and her kind of lying to them and talking about how, yes, your dad is definitely out there fighting with Darrow and Orion and everyone else, and Warlock too, kind of in a positive way to sell the war to them and spin it to them. It reminds me so much of like C.S. Lewis and a lot of those kind of moments talking about the war and things like that.
Yeah.
It feels like tropey, but it's well Well done. Really, really like kind of the imprint of false hopes and dreams. So they go to bed thereafter, and there's a disturbance in the night that sounds like a ship flying overhead, and Tyrion and a number of the other people in the area believe that it could be something else, including her sister with the two nephews. And so they decide, Tyrion and Lyria decide that they're going to investigate, but Lyria needs to actually get dressed or prepare to go. And so there's the man of the house line, of course, that's there, where it's like, I'll go take care of it. I'm the man of the house. And she's like, no, you fucking moron. Don't do that.
She like laughs so loud at him, scoffs at him.
Yeah, right. Like very literally her last interaction with her brother is laughing at him for trying to overstep these boundaries. And because of that same foolishness, he dies very tragically.
Well,
sorry, Tyrion.
Because of the foolishness and because of one of our good old friends from the first book.
It's worth talking about. What do you make of the mysterious group, the Red Hand?
I mean, clearly it is the evolution of the Red Legion, which, if I will say so myself, Red Legion's a way better name.
I feel like the Red Hand feels more terroristy. Legion feels more army.
Legion feels more villain. Hand feels more band of loosely connected adversary. I don't know. That's the feeling I'm getting off of it. But
yeah,
I didn't catch it until you pointed it out that the person being described is certainly fucking Harmony. With their burned out face.
It almost feels bad that I had to do that, but at the same time, I missed it in my first and second read-throughs of this when I was just reading through Iron Gold before Dark Age, and I didn't really realize it until a certain section in Dark Age where Lyria references this again, where this is referenced, I should say. It's not necessarily referenced by, it might be referenced by Volga, you don't know. Yeah, where this was referenced inside of Dark Age, and I just went, oh shit, of course it's Lyria. That makes so much sense. Or of course it's Harmony. Jesus Christ. And all the dots just connected for me and lined up, and I was like, oh fuck, I get it. Why didn't I catch that the first time inside of this? And yeah, part of that is because of the POV switch, though, right? Like that's part of the magic of having multiple POVs. Is now there's some dramatic irony where you and I might recognize something that a character might not. It's not as though Lyria can put a name to Harmony, but we can put a name to Harmony.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. I hadn't considered that.
Anything else on Lyria?
So, if anybody knows me from this show, I love like my process of reading the section and then listening to the audiobook of the section, and I think I'm going to forgo the audiobook going forward. You warned me of this, but it is not the same, specifically with Lyria. Not that interesting. I didn't like the way her voice was read.
Our final chapter of this episode, chapter 6, Ephraim, the Eternal City. And we get our third point of view for the book. We know based on that the prelude that there are going to be at least 4. But god damn it, do I love Ephraim's internal voice.
Yeah, certainly.
He's just got this crazy cadence to him. I love this quote that's just right off the bat. It's, my main grudge against the ancient Egyptians isn't that they pioneered the institution of mass slavery for public works. It's that they were so damn tiny. And it's got this nice like bitter tone to it that a lot of his humor has. And I adore that. So
speaking of that quote, my favorite quote is like the next sentence, which is also kind of bitter and dark a little bit, but he refers to the mummy that he, would you call it desecrated? Removing them from their sarcophagus? I think that'd be desecration. Technically.
Yeah, I would think so, especially if you take into consideration the religion.
Referring to that mummy as a raisin that he still smells after completing his journey.
If nothing else, Ephraim has a holy personality. Mm-hmm. He's just so interesting on that front.
I'm excited. I'm really excited about getting into him. He is not an orange. that fixes escalators or elevators.
Elevators. He's not an elevator operator.
He's not. Despite what I thought, he seems less cool than that. Not everybody can be an elevator operator, so I get it.
You know, you say that, and I just can't help but think that maybe there's an alternate life where Ephraim and Trig lived happily ever after as elevator operators. And I think Aaron would be in on that with me.
Yeah, I think she probably...
God damn it, do I also love that we hit this low to the ground view of a city within the Republic, and especially being this kind of sprawling metropolis that is Hyperion. It's so cool to hear the description of the named Eternal City, one that predominantly stays in the sun or in the night, depending on the day cycle, because it takes 29 Earth days for a full day on the moon. It's so cool as it's described.
Yeah.
What a unique system too, and to like truly talk about it and embrace it as a writer, to like think about the actual moon cycle and how that would impact the city is fascinating.
I mean, it's pretty trivial to think about the moon cycle waxing and waning and waxing again, taking about a month, but applying that understanding to what it means to like have a city on the moon is entirely different.
Just so cool. I'm so glad that we get this kind of low to ground perspective that even Ben was hinting at and talking about. We're also introduced to Zoladone, a wicked cocktail meant to jack up dopamine and kill empathy, and effectively bury, with our Ephraim here with F, it buries the memories of Trig.
Yeah. I mean,
and man, is that
seems to just
interesting.
kind of bury any sort of emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And Trig's memory, as far as I can understand, is basically entirely emotional for Ephraim. Understandably. Like, it's who he was. It's who Trig was for him. Just, that relationship, in retrospect at least, is almost entirely emotional.
I love that Ephraim goes from, kind of these moments of like Zoladone and other things like that to the kind of, I think the mastery of Zoladone from a writing perspective and this drug is really how we see how Ephraim was before that with all of these emotions, to kind of the deadening of him as he takes this into the second half, how his perspective is really warped and changed by the drug over the course of this chapter. Even it's like we almost have two different characters split between before he takes the Zoladone and after.
So the way that you just described that, I'm curious, do you think that he was more emotional before any sort of experience with Zoladone or the loss of Trig or anything like that?
So you're talking about the long-term impacts potentially of Zoladone?
Yeah, exactly.
That's interesting.
Do you think that's something that's been affecting him in a long-term way?
I mean, I think any drug like this, which is described as a particularly addictive designer drug, has long-term impacts. What those impacts are, I'll let the story tell you. But I think regardless, it's a good read to pick that out.
Yeah. I'm not necessarily trusting Ephraim to be who he has been, who he's been presented to be in previous books.
Well, he's kind of an unreliable narrator, right? Like a little bit later, he says something along the lines, he's reflecting on his past, and he's just got this I was a different person then kind of bent to him, right? He says, I remember boarding the tram to come to the city center wearing the winged pyramid pin they gave us, puffing my chest out when high colors would nod to me or low colors would step out of my path. Stupid kid. He thought that pin made him a man. It just made him a pet. And nowadays, it'll get you scalped. And that is so much harder even than the joke that he told earlier, right? And it just, I think it speaks to kind of the way that Zoladone affects his personality. It gives him just a sharper edge versus kind of there's a weird dullness to him almost without it. I don't know.
Yeah, entirely.
Actually, it might be the other way. He's sharp and then dull, something like that. It's a very different transition around the knife edge.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I skipped over it a little bit, but we get a whole cast of characters here that are introduced too with Trig. We get Volga, the stout, with Ephraim. Trig's very dead.
Is he coming back?
I mean, that's up to you to decide. Volga, a short and stout obsidian, of course, who's 6'6", a little bit shorter than you are. Not from the ice poles. She's actually got like a chiseled face, a sort of angular face. We also get Dano, who's a young, pimply red. We get Syrah, who's a green locksmith, who is basically who you predicted Ephraim would be, kind of. Except for you kind of said orange, which is funny.
Pretty much.
I think it's all great because the scene builds out and introduces us to this like Ocean's 11 crew breaking into the Hyperion Museum of Antiquities.
It reminded me a lot of the scene where they break into Quicksilver's museum in Phobos, right? So I think it's mostly because we described it as an Ocean's 11-esque like heist. It's good to see a little bit of parallel between the books.
You know, it is funny when we were going through that. I was just like, I wonder how much PJ is going to like the sort of change over there with Ephraim, because we do get a little bit more of the sort of heist thriller that was there in the second part of Morningstar. I love it personally. I love kind of the roguishness here.
Certainly.
It's a very different spin on the entire story. Mm-hmm. So I realized reading through this chapter, and when Ben and I were talking about it in the podcast, I might have actually cut it out, but we kind of spoiled this last week in the discussion. But Ephraim is really the one who delivers the goods relating to the end of humanity on Earth as we know it today. They just mass sterilize the planet after winning the war, and after 100 million good Earthling lives were lost. They just fucking committed bloodless genocide by removing the ability to procreate.
Is that
just let
technically
them die out
genocide?
over time. I think it might be specieside because of the separation, but you could call it genocide. I mean, genocide is just a group.
But this doesn't seem like it's actually actively killing anyone.
Well, it's preventing them from reproducing, which is effectively killing.
But it's not killing anything. Technically.
So, okay.
Technically. I am really splitting hairs here, and I'm really digging in because I want to know what this would actually technically be considered. Because I don't think it's
the definition.
genocide.
Here's the definition of genocide: the deliberate killing of a large number of people from a particular nation or ethnic group with the aim of destroying that nation or group. So I think specifically the aim of destroying that nation or group.
So for that definition to work, you have to concede that sterilizing is equivalent to killing a future generation. And if you
sterilize everyone,
it has the same outcome, but is it technically killing? Like this?
No, it's exterminating. Is that better? Like,
yes,
it was actually a bloodless extermination.
Yes, that is better. I'm not trying to make I'm not trying to be edgy or anything like that. Like, I just really want to know the specifics of like what that term would be and what's actually happening from a language perspective. And I think it's technically a fairly specific action.
So this still has the feeling of genocide. I would say it's also maybe a xenocide if you start to consider them as separate species, and if you consider the golds to be alien enough, it might potentially be xenocide. Mm-hmm. And it's definitely an extermination, but I don't feel like bloodless genocide is that far outside of the realm of possibility when you look at this. It's a terrifying moment. It's a terrifying line. It's a great paragraph, and having Ephraim be in the moment of the Zoladone being the soulless character to deliver this harsh note about the conquering and sort of the exhibits that surround him is just fantastic, because he can deliver it without empathy. He's just like, they just mass sterilized the planet after winning the war. It was just the move. Made sense. We round out that conversation with finding out the reason and the goal of the little heist. It's to steal the razor of Selenius Alloon, the Lightbringer's razor, and the sort of original razor from the conquering. Fantastic. The alarm sounds, and now it's time to make their escape. And that's where we end for the week.
Yeah, that's where you dropped me. That's where you got me to sit and wait for a little while.
We settled on this beforehand, but I don't think that there are any really good predictions to really make at this point. And so I don't think we're going to do predictions this week. It doesn't really make sense.
Right. I agree.
The only thing I would ask is, do you have anything else to say about any of the characters? We talked about Lyria, I think, at length. We talked about Darrow, of course, at length, and sort of the relationships there. We kind of have buzzed through Ephraim a little bit, but I just wanted to see if you had any other feelings or thoughts there.
I mean, obviously we know Darrow, but the other two, I feel like we just need more time with them to really understand what's going on. I have thoughts and I have feelings and I have ideas, but none that are well enough fleshed out or developed to share here. And
sure,
I'd rather wait to see narratively how things go. So
okay, with that, next week we'll be reading through chapter 12.
What chapter is that? Did I hear you correctly?
I've triple checked. We'll be reading through chapter 12.
Through chapter 12. So up until chapter 13. So once you see 13,
Correct.
stop reading. But when you see 12, continue reading until you see 13.
Correct.
Is that right?
That is a fair description.
Okay. Are you going to come at me like in a couple days and say, hey, sorry, fucked up again? It's actually until chapter 12.
No, I triple checked. I have everything bookmarked inside of my book. I double checked there. I double checked our calendar. But yeah, we are for sure through chapter 12.
I guess that's where we're dropping you. If you want to keep listening, you can hear me talk about how you can help us, which is a pretty cool thing to do. And all you got to do is like, I don't know, find somebody who you think would like us and tell them, hey, you might like them. That's really like the most important one. But if you've got nobody who you think would like us because we're just crazy, horrible people, True. Which, I mean, if you listen to us and you think we're horrible people, but you still listen to us, you're a horrible person too. So take that for what it is. But you could also leave us a 5-star review on the podcatcher of your choice. That helps us in getting attracted by other people that might like us. Other people like you. If you are so inclined to follow us on Instagram or Twitter, we are at Words Whiskey Pod. We love interacting with anybody who follows us. We have so many different conversations going with listeners and with friends and with other podcasters, and just in general, if we get a message on either of those, we will respond. Like it's both of us do. And it kind of gets annoying because when I'm in the middle of a conversation with one of our listeners and Crossland like looks at it, I don't get that notification. But we're both pretty in tune with it and pretty on top of it. So
and vice versa.
Well, yeah, and vice versa. I read messages as Crossland's getting them, and he doesn't see them, and I laugh. But it's one of our favorite things is interacting with all of you lovely people. So please follow us on Instagram and Twitter. And check out the drinks that we've been having at our top shelf on wordsandwhiskey.show. I think that's it. I think that's all the plugs that we got to make. Sound good? Did I miss anything?
Sounds good.
All right.
No.
Perfect.
Sounds good. Oh, Erin says that she will personally attack you if you don't leave us a 5-star review. So
she will.
Just keep that in mind.
She bites, I'm pretty sure. She seemed like she's got very vicious teeth.
She was very upset when she looked at our podcast reviews and saw that someone left us a 1-star. So we definitely need. Oh yeah, we have one 1-star review. Fine, for something somewhere. But she was very upset. She was going to hunt and seek and kill that person. So very unfortunate for you.
Yep, that would be unfortunate.
5 stars only, according to Erin.
All right.